the name that time forgot. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty corral as Jacob worked the young mustang, his weathered hands steady on the lead rope. The horse danced sideways, nostrils flaring, but Jacob's voice remained calm and low, a gentle murmur that seemed to float on the desert breeze. "Easy now, Thunder. Easy does it." He'd named all his horses after the sounds they reminded him of. Thunder for this one's restless hoofbeats. Whisper for the pale mare that moved like smoke. Creek for the bay that nickered like running water. Simple names for a simple life. Here in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where the nearest neighbor was a day's ride away. Jacob preferred it that way. Had for nigh on 15 years now. Ever since he'd ridden into this forgotten valley with nothing but the clothes on his back, a rifle across his saddle, and memories he'd rather leave buried deeper than any grave. The settlement of Dos Cruces lay 20 miles south, close enough to trade his broken horses for supplies, far enough to keep the curious at bay. Most folks there knew him only as the horseman or that hermit up north. They paid fair price for his well-trained mounts and asked few questions, which suited Jacob just fine. He was leading Thunder back to the stable when he heard the sound of hoofbeats on the hard-packed trail that wound up from the valley floor. Two riders by the rhythm of it and coming fast. Jacob paused, one hand on Thunder's neck, and squinted against the morning glare. A pair of young women rode into his yard, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces flushed from hard riding. The first was maybe 20, with auburn hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat and wearing a riding dress that had seen better days. Her companion appeared a few years younger, blonde and pretty in a delicate way that spoke of town living rather than ranch work. "Mr. Kellerman," the auburn-haired girl called out, swinging down from her mount with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "We need to speak with you." Jacob's blood went cold. Nobody had called him by that name, his real name, since he'd left Colorado Territory all those years ago. He stood perfectly still, studying the girls' faces, searching for something familiar. "I'm afraid you've got me confused with someone else, miss," he said carefully. "Name's Jacob, just Jacob." The blonde girl dismounted more carefully, smoothing her skirt. "Oh, don't try to fool us, Samuel Kellerman, we know exactly who you are." "Hush, Clara," the first girl snapped. "You're making a mess of this." She turned back to Jacob, her green eyes blazing with determination. "I'm Emma Dawson, and this is Clara Whitmore. And you, sir, are Samuel James Kellerman, formerly of the Colorado Rangers, wanted for—" "I ain't wanted for nothin'," Jacob cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "And I told you, you've got the wrong man." But even as he spoke, his mind was racing. Emma Dawson. The name tugged at something deep in his memory like a fishhook catching on old leather. Dawson. Where had he heard that name before? Clara stepped forward, her chin lifted defiantly. "Don't you dare lie to us. My father told me all about you, about what you did in Silver Creek. How you disappeared one night with a posse on your trail." "Your father?" Jacob's eyes narrowed. "And who might that be?" "Judge Marcus Whitmore," Clara said proudly. "He presided over the trial. He said you were guilty as sin but slippery as an eel. Well, we found you at last." Jacob felt the old familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the burden he'd carried for 15 years like stones in his saddlebags. He glanced around his peaceful little ranch, the corral where Thunder still waited, the cabin he'd built with his own hands, the garden where he grew his simple meals. All of it might as well be smoke now. "Trial?" Emma whirled on Clara, her face twisted with confusion and anger. "What trial? What are you talking about?" Clara blinked, suddenly uncertain. "The trial for the Silver Creek robbery, of course. When Mr. Kellerman here stole that army payroll and killed 2 soldiers, you lying little snake." Emma's voice rose to a near shout. "Samuel Kellerman never robbed anybody. He was a ranger, one of the best. He was tracking the real thieves when—" She stopped abruptly, her face going pale. Jacob watched this exchange with growing dread. Two different stories, both with enough truth in them to cut deep. He set Thunder loose in the corral and turned to face the girls, his hands hanging loose at his sides. "Maybe you ladies better come inside," he said quietly. "This conversation ain't fit for the open air." His cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs. Jacob gestured for the girls to sit while he remained standing, his back to the wall out of old habit. "Now then," he said, "why don't you both tell me exactly what you think you know, and we'll see if we can't sort this mess out." Emma glanced at Clara with obvious distrust before speaking. My father was Captain William Dawson of the Colorado Ranger. He worked with Samuel Kellerman for 3 years, said he was the finest tracker and the most honest man he'd ever known. Her voice caught slightly. He used to tell me stories about their adventures when I was little. Used to? Jacob asked softly. He died when I was 12. Fever took him. Emma's hands twisted in her lap. But before he died he told me that Sam Kellerman had been wrongly accused of that Silver Creek business. Said Sam was actually hunting the real thieves when everything went to hell. He made me promise that if I ever found Sam I'd tell him that Bill Dawson knew the truth. Jacob closed his eyes for a moment. Bill Dawson. Lord, he remembered Bill, sandy-haired and quick to laugh, with a wife and baby daughter back in Denver. They'd ridden together for 3 years, shared campfires and gunfights and long nights under the stars. Bill had been the closest thing to a brother Jacob had ever had. Your father was a good man, Jacob said quietly. The best partner I ever had. Clara made a small sound of protest. But my father said, your father, Jacob interrupted, was a pompous fool who cared more about his reputation than the truth. Clara's face flushed red. How dare you? Judge Whitmore was a pillar of the community, a man of unshakable integrity. Judge Whitmore, Jacob said, his voice flat and cold, railroaded an innocent man because it was easier than admitting he'd made a mistake. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Clara stared at him with her mouth open while Emma leaned forward, her eyes bright with something between hope and fury. Then it's true, Emma whispered. You really are Samuel Kellerman. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring out the small window at his horses grazing in the morning sun. Thunder had calmed down and was cropping grass peacefully, his tail swishing at flies. Such a simple thing, a horse eating grass. Such a peaceful thing. I was Samuel Kellerman, he said finally. Been Jacob Miller for 15 years now. Figured Sam Kellerman died the night he rode out of Colorado with half the territory wanting his neck stretched. Clara found her voice again. Then you admit it, you admit you're guilty. I admit I'm Samuel Kellerman, Jacob, but I never robbed nobody, and I sure as hell never killed those soldiers. He moved to the fireplace, staring into the cold ashes. The story wanted to come out now after all these years of silence. Maybe it was time. It was September of Army payroll was due to come through Silver Creek on its way to Fort Garland. Word got out somehow, it always did in those days. And Captain Dawson sent me ahead to scout for trouble. Emma leaned forward. My father mentioned that. He said you'd been tracking a gang for weeks. The Morrison brothers and their crew. Jacob nodded. Meanest bunch of cutthroats you ever saw. They'd been hitting Army supply trains all summer. Always seemed to know exactly when and where to strike. I'd tracked them to a hideout in the hills above Silver Creek, was planning to ride back and get Bill and the rest of the boys. But something went wrong, Emma said. Something always goes wrong. Jacob's voice was bitter. I was watching their camp when I heard gunshots from the direction of town. Then I saw smoke. By the time I got down there it was all over. 2 soldiers dead, the payroll gone, and the Morrison gang vanished like smoke. Clara shifted in her chair. My father said there were witnesses who saw you fleeing the scene. There were witnesses, all right. Problem was, they saw what they expected to see. A man on horseback, wearing a ranger badge, riding hell for leather out of town. Could have been anybody in a uniform, but it was easier to blame the stranger than look too close at their own. Jacob turned away from the fireplace, his eyes hard as flint. Your father, Miss Whitmore, made up his mind before he heard the first witness. Had me tried and convicted in the newspapers before I even knew there'd been a robbery. When I rode into town the next morning to report what I'd seen, half the citizens wanted to string me up on the spot. But surely the other rangers, Emma began. Bill Dawson believed me. So did a few others. But your father had the town whipped up into a frenzy, Miss Whitmore. He was running for territorial delegate that year, needed to look tough on crime. Easier to hang a scapegoat than admit the real thieves had slipped through his fingers. Clara's face had gone pale. That's not how my father told it. I'll bet it's not. Jacob's laugh held no humor. Judge Marcus Whitmore, defender of justice. Tell me, did he ever mention that he owned stock in the bank that was handling the payroll transfer? Did he tell you he stood to lose a fortune if that money wasn't recovered? The silence that followed was heavy as a thundercloud. Clara stared at Jacob with growing horror while Emma's hands clenched into fists. The night before the trial, Jacob continued, Bill Dawson came to see me in jail. Told me he'd found evidence that cleared my name. One of the Morrison gang had been bragging in a saloon, giving details only the real robber would know. Bill was going to present it to the court. What happened? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Bill never made it to court. Found him face down in Cherry Creek the next morning. Accident, they said. Drunk and fell in, except Bill Dawson never touched liquor in his life. Emma made a small choking sound. Clara just stared, her face white as flour. I knew then that I was never going to get a fair trial, Jacob said. Not with Judge Whitmore presiding and half the town baying for blood. So I did the only thing I could do. I ran. The cabin fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Outside, one of the horses nickered softly. How? Clara asked finally. How did you escape? There was a guard named Murphy who owed Bill Dawson a favor. He left my cell door unlocked and looked the other way. I took nothing but my horse and my rifle, and I rode north. Kept riding until I found this place. Jacob gestured around the simple cabin. Been here ever since. Breaking horses, keeping to myself, trying to forget that Sam Kellerman ever existed. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. My father was right. He always said you were innocent. Clara looked stricken. But my father, he wouldn't have. He was a good man. He was a politician. Jacob said, not unkindly. Politicians do what they have to do to stay in power. Sometimes that means sacrificing the truth. Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't, I need some air. She hurried outside, leaving Emma and Jacob alone. Through the window they could see her standing by the corral, her shoulders shaking. She believed in him, Emma said quietly. Her father, I mean. He was all she had after her mother died. I know the feeling, Jacob replied. Bill Dawson was like a father to me too. Emma studied his face. What will you do now that we know where you are? Jacob was quiet for a moment. I reckon that depends on what you two aim to do with the information. I won't tell anyone, Emma said immediately. My father made me promise to find you and tell you he believed in your innocence. That's what I came to do. As far as I'm concerned, Samuel Kellerman died 15 years ago, and Jacob Miller is just a horsebreaker who wants to be left alone. And Miss Whitmore? Emma glanced out the window at Clara's trembling figure. I think she's got some thinking to do. Her whole world just got turned upside down. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the horses outside and the distant cry of a hawk. Finally Emma spoke again. Can I ask you something? Why horses? Why did you choose this life? Jacob smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in days. Horses don't lie, they don't scheme or plot or sell each other out for political gain. They're honest creatures. You treat them fair, they treat you fair. You earn their trust, they'll carry you through hell itself. Like thunder? Thunder's still making up his mind about me, but we'll get there. Jacob paused. Your father was like that too, come to think of it. Honest as the day is long. Never met a more trustworthy man. Emma smiled through her tears. He used to say the same about you. Outside, Clara had stopped crying and was watching Thunder graze. The young Mustang had wandered closer to the fence, his curiosity overcoming his caution. We should go, Emma said finally. We've disrupted your peace enough for one day. Where will you go? It's a long ride back to town. We'll manage. We've been traveling together for 3 weeks. Looking for you. We can handle one more day. Jacob frowned. 3 weeks. Where did you come from? Denver. Clara heard rumors about a horsebreaker up north, who matched your description. We've been checking every ranch and settlement between here and Colorado. That's a hell of a journey for 2 young ladies. Emma's chin lifted with pride. I'm Bill Dawson's daughter. I can handle my. Jacob didn't doubt it. He could see her father's steel in her spine, his determination in the set of her jaw. They walked outside together. Clara was still standing by the corral, but she'd composed herself and was watching Thunder with interest. He's beautiful, she said without turning around. How long have you been working with him? 2 weeks, Jacob replied. He's got spirit, but he's smart. He'll make someone a fine mount once he learns to trust. Clara turned to face him, her eyes red but steady. Mr. Kellerman, Jacob, I owe you an apology. I came here believing my father's version of events. I wanted to see justice done, but if what you've told us is true, it's true, Jacob said simply. Every word. Clara nodded slowly. Injustice was never done. The real killers got away, and an innocent man had to give up his life and his name. Sometimes that's how it goes. But it's not right. Jacob studied her face, seeing something of her father's stubbornness there, but tempered with a compassion Marcus Whitmore had never possessed. No, he agreed, it's not right. But it's done. Can't change the past, Miss Whitmore, can only decide what to do with the future. Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching thunder crop grass in the morning sun. Will you teach me? She asked suddenly. Teach you what? To work with horses, like you do. She turned to face him fully. I've got money, my father left me well provided for. I could pay you and help with the work. I'm stronger than I look. Jacob and Emma exchanged glances. This was the last thing either of them had expected. Miss Whitmore, Jacob said carefully, this is a hard life. Lonely, nothing like what you're used to. What I'm used to is living a lie, Clara said fiercely. Everything I believed about my father, about justice, about right and wrong, it was all built on quicksand. I need to find something real, something true. Jacob looked at the young woman standing before him, Judge's daughter, town-bred, delicate as china, but there was steel in her voice, and fire in her eyes, and something about her reminded him of himself 15 years ago, when his whole world had crumbled and he'd had to build it back from nothing. It's dangerous, he warned. If anyone recognizes me, if word gets out about who I really am, then we'll deal with it together, Clara said. All three of us. Emma stepped forward. I'm not going back to Denver either. Not yet. I came here to fulfill my father's promise, but I think maybe there's more to do than just deliver a message. Jacob looked from one determined face to the other, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Hope. Not the cautious, guarded hope of a man hiding from his past, but the bright, fierce hope of someone who might finally have a chance to build a future. All right, he said finally, but we do this my way. No questions asked, and if I say it's time to run, we run. Understood. Both women nodded. And Miss Whitmore, Clara, if you're going to stay, you're going to have to learn to work with your hands. No more delicate town lady business. This is rough country, and it doesn't coddle anybody. Clara smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all day. I wouldn't have it any other way. Jacob nodded toward the corral where Thunder was watching them with alert, intelligent eyes. Well then, he said, I reckon we better get started. Thunder's been waiting long enough for his next lesson, and it looks like he's about to get some new students. As the three of them walked toward the corral, the morning sun climbed higher over the Sangre de Cristo mountains, burning away the last of the shadows that had hidden this valley, and the man who lived in it for so long. There would be challenges ahead, Jacob knew, danger, questions that would need answering and choices that would have to be made. But for now there was just the warm sun on their faces, the sound of horses nickering softly in the corral, and the beginning of something new, something built not on lies and political convenience, but on truth, hard-won and painful, but truth nonetheless. Samuel Kellerman had died 15 years ago on a dark night in Colorado territory, but maybe, just maybe, he could live again under the wide New Mexico sky, surrounded by honest horses, and the kind of friends who were worth more than their weight in gold. Thunder tossed his head and whinnied as they approached, as if he understood that everything was about to change. Jacob smiled and reached for the lead rope, ready to begin again.